This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, we'll open up another champagne bottle.
Okay, l'chaim everyone. We're here in the Droppier taste testing room, and there's an interesting medrash that comes to mind about a drunkard, an alcoholic, who was depleting his family assets. He was using all the money in his house to buy wine, beer, bourbon, whiskey, scotch, and other fine drinks. And finally, the children had enough. They couldn't take him anymore. So they picked him up and they deposited him one night in a drunken stupor into a cemetery, into an open grave, and they parked him there. Meanwhile, there was a group of soldiers near in the cemetery, and they came, fully loaded with all of their alcohol. They came with like bars, and all of a sudden they got word that there's an invading army, and they abandoned all their alcohol right there in the cemetery, right by his kever. And, he wakes up a day later from his drunken stupor. He looks around, and he says, it's amazing. Gan Eden is much better than he thought. And he's sitting there. He starts grabbing bottles, and he's lying there in the grave. And 7 days pass, and he's drinking nonstop. A week later, the family had Rachmanis on him. They wanted to check on how he's doing. And they come back, and they see him in the cemetery completely set up with like bars and bars worth. It was like, like loit, bismanoi. And that's the end of the medrash. They had Rachmanis on him, and they brought him back home. So Rabbi Desser says this is the most bizarre medrash in the history of the medrash. What is the medrash teaching us? That they remove this guy, and they put him to the cemetery, and he's lying there half dead, drinking alcohol. And Rav Desser says we learn from this medrash a very important inyan, and that is b'derech sha'adam roitze leilech melich hanasei. God leads a person in their chosen path. If you want to be an alcoholic and you do your best job to obtain alcohol, you will have siyata d'shmaya l'malam and ateva to obtain alcohol. The Rebbeinu Shalom leads a person on their desired path. Now, it's very important that we came to this location so you have a little bit of an understanding. Rashi, we said, was a vintner. Rabbeinu Tam was a vintner. And this was the region that they produced their wine. If you look in the Chuvas of Rashi, whether it's Chuvas Rashi or Sefer Ha'ira, many of the shilos are about Yayin Nesach. Many of the shilos that we are machmer about, Rashi was Meikal. There's a famous Chuva, Chelek Aleph, Siman Kuf Yud Gimel. Somebody knocked on Rashi's door, a big vintner, and he was driving barrels of wine in the pouring rain. And all of a sudden it was thundering and lightning, and one of his horses tripped, and the barrels went flying, and they flew into a pit, and the man didn't know what to do. And all of a sudden, two Oivdei Kacham Mazolis came out of the forest, and they helped lift the barrels out of the pit onto the wagon, and he came back home, B'simcha Atzuma, that Hashem sent Shluchim to save his assets. The next day he tells the story in Shul, and they said, it's very nice, but your Yayin is Yayin Nesach. The Oivdei Kacham Mazolis, they lifted it up. And he came to Rashi crying, what's going to happen, what's going to be? And Rashi paskined, when was the last time you saw an Oived Kacham Mazolis pour a yayin to a statue of an idol? Did you ever see it? Do you know anyone who did it? You don't have to be machber on it, Bizman Hazeh, under these circumstances. And Rashi was Meikal. But Rashi told the student, I can't tell him. You tell him, I can't let the word get out that this is my opinion. So the student said, Rashi, I want to tell you, I until now was afraid to ask, but I had a cup of wine the other day, and an Oived Kacham Mazolis banged into me, and some of the wine spilled out. What happened to the wine in my cup? And Rashi said, the wine that spilled onto the ground, that got absorbed in the ground, you should be machmer about. Don't drink that. The wine that remained in your cup, you could be lenient about. That was the psak of Rashi, and now you can understand why these questions were some of the most. If you look in Sefer Ha'ira, Siman Kuf Yud Gimel, it's the longest siman in all the Chuvas of Rashi because of these were the most prevalent shilas for this region. Thank you very much.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.